Hi everyone, Scarlowy Railway 01, aka the Engine Inspector, here again to talk with you guys about A Shed for Edward. Before I do that, though, I just want to touch on the Christmas episodes that came out yesterday or a few days ago, depending on when this gets out and when you're watching this. I'm not going to touch those till Christmas time. I don't know, I feel like it's more appropriate to review them when they come out. Not when they come out in the UK, because we don't necessarily know when that's going to be, but when it's more in season. So you will be seeing me review those, but just a little bit further down the line. Also, it'll be good for me to take a little break after cranking out so many of these in a row. That's a lot of more episodes to cover, and I think I will have more time to do that around Christmas time. So, anyway, on to A Shed for Edward. First of all, I'd just like to say right off the bat, I'm really disappointed this episode was not called Shedward. I think that's a huge missed opportunity, and I don't know. I don't know why the writers didn't do that. It's no obvious reason to me. Edward is really on a roll in this season. He's had some great episodes. This is not the best of them, but he's so in character here that every moment with him is really, really good. I personally think this episode is a little bit weaker story-wise, but Edward is easily at his best as he's been in ages. He's had more roles this season than he's had. I can't even remember the last time he's had this many stories, and when he's been this good, maybe in the Miller era or in the new series he had some roles all at once, but I'm really pleased with how Edward's been treated this season. It's really nice to see him getting some attention for a change. He seems to be underutilized. I will come back to that underutilized thing in a minute here, actually. But first of all, there's great continuity in this episode. It follows the events of the fastest red engine on Sodor and actually overlaps with it a little bit, which is great to see. Like I've said a million times before, it's great to see the stories have an effect on each other and that time is passing in sort of a logical way, and that these events don't just happen in a vacuum, that they happen and it affects other events. And it reminds me a lot of how arcs progressed in the Railway series, even if it isn't a clear, like Duck and the Diesel Engine, where it's clearly a 4-part story told in 4 chapters. These are individual stories that, to me, sort of showcase a bigger story about some major event. Kind of like the Railway series books with more standalone stories. The one that springs to mind is more about Thomas the Tank Engine, because that all sort of, in a microcosmic way, surrounds the repair of the viaduct and how that and this feud between Thomas and Percy. So, anyway, some great details in the construction scenes. Oliver, Max, and Monty are at the construction site, and Sir Topham Hatt wearing his hard hat is fantastic. Other than that, I don't have any more huge praise to say about the story. There's one elephant in the room, though, and that's at the end of the episode. Spoilers if you haven't watched this, but really, come on, you should have watched it by now. Or you shouldn't be watching this video if you haven't watched it. Anyway, at the end of the episode, Edward moves out of Tidmouth Sheds to be stationed permanently at Wellsworth with Philip. I don't care about this change. I do not care one bit. The thing I tweeted about this morning, which kind of frustrated me, is people seem to be thinking like this is the end of Edward. Someone tweeted a picture of Edward like in a casket being lowered into the ground and saying goodbye old friend, and people are saying this is the end of Thomas. I don't like it anymore. I don't want to watch it because of what they did to Edward. Not that big a deal. Really, it's not that big a deal. If anything, you could argue that this is a return to the Railway series, where the main crew at Tidmouth permanently housed like 5 engines, like Donald, Douglas, Bear, Henry, Gordon, and James, and then everyone else, even Donald and Douglas, were sort of just in and out depending on when they were working and where they were working. I think that's how Tidmouth Sheds should be regardless. In the TV series, like it was in the classic series even, it was like that. It was sort of around season 5 that we sort of got that rigid lineup at Tidmouth Sheds. Anyway, I don't care that Edward's gone. It to me, like I said, one thing that I've loved this season is engines working in places that make sense. In my perfect world, we'd have Farquhar Sheds back, and we would have Thomas, Percy, and Toby all live there, and we would never see them at Tidmouth Sheds. Maybe once in a while we could, but by and large, I think it would be best if they were at Farquhar, if Edward's at Wellsworth, if Salty and Porter are at the docks, if Duck and Oliver are on their branch line. It really makes sense to have Edward be at Wellsworth, and it doesn't affect his character's standing in the series. I know that there's been a rumor going around for months now that Edward and Henry are being written out of the series, or at least their roles, or excuse me, being written out of the Steam team, with their roles in the series being diminished. First of all, we have no confirmation of that. Second of all, this episode is not confirmation of that. Edward's role is pretty small already. I hate to break it to you. It's pretty small already. So they can't... He's effectively not a part of the Steam team. In fact, the Steam team, I don't think exists anymore. Sure, we see them in the opening credits, but they... as an entity, we don't see the same rigid structures we did in the Miller era with we have to have one episode about engines 1 through 7 and then 4 about Thomas, maybe 3 about James, 2 about Percy. We don't see that structure anymore where you could almost count how many episodes each member of the Steam team had per season, and it almost was always exactly the same. Here, we don't really have that. We get focus on minor characters. We have episodes on the Estate Railway. We have episodes on Duck's branch line. We have episodes on the Small Railway. We have Harwick. We have mainline episodes, but we have such a huge cast now that the Steam team doesn't really... It isn't important. So who cares if Edward and Henry aren't in the Steam team? I understand that it would... People are saying that it's like they're being written out of the main cast, but really, they, especially Edward, does not have that much to do in the main cast anyway, except for, say, 2 lines in Tinmouth Sheds during some random episodes. I would much rather he not be in the Steam team and have episodes like we've seen this season, or moments like we've seen this season from now on, because that's way better than having him be part of the core cast, in my opinion. So, I don't care that much that Edward has moved. Sorry for the rant, but I don't think it's that significant. We'll see how it shakes out in the future, but this episode I don't think is an indication that Edward is gone. I find that very strange. Anyway, I actually thought this episode was just sort of okay. I know I just talked quite a bit about some good stuff, but I think it's pretty weak story-wise. We have a very, very repetitive plot. Even though Edward's great in it, there's not that much that's driving this. It's incredibly repetitive. It's, you know, it's the same thing over and over again, and it doesn't really ever... The stakes don't escalate, and it just sort of stays at one level. And I know I talked about Philip a few days ago, but he's a little bit much in this episode. I found him to be a little bit irritating, and I find he's hit or miss. Like I said, here's a little bit of a miss, and we'll see how the relationship with Edward shakes out in the future. I've always thought that Edward works best when he is mentoring younger engines, or being the voice of reason to those sort of zany characters like Thomas, like Bill and Ben. I think that Philip is another great person for him to take under his wing, or his wheel, or whatever. So I'm curious to see where it goes. I'm not appalled by the fact that Edward and Philip are living together, as some people apparently are. But anyway, you can have your opinion, I can have mine, and we can talk about it in the comments, or on Soda Island forums, or on Twitter, or wherever. I'm happy to discuss these things. Anyway, like I said, not a great episode, definitely not a terrible one. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I thought it was, like I said, story-wise didn't do much for me, but we did get some nice moments with Edward, which is really the saving grace of this episode, in my opinion. So, thanks for watching. I'll be back around Christmas time to do more of these vlog reviews, and then as episodes are released, I will try to keep up with them. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, watch my other content, the old engine inspector videos, the wooden railway series. Got a lot of stuff on this channel, so please check it out, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and thanks again.